Hi, I'm Dr. Sonaa Kakar, and these are a series of mock therapy sessions. And the first session that we started with was on anxiety, a patient who's very anxious. You've done part one of that before. And those who are going to watch this, I strongly recommend that you first take a look at the part one of the session so that you get familiar with the presenting problem and how the therapist and the patient together take a look at the symptoms in the session. Now, the second part is on what is causing anxiety in the session with the therapist. And I want to thank Ms. Dollar for lending her voice and emotions to play the role of the patient. Here we are using the graded format of intensive short term dynamic psychotherapy. The patient has already told the therapist that she's very anxious. She's also told the therapist that while she's sitting with the therapist, she is feeling a queasiness in her stomach. She feels like going to the toilet. She's also about to get a migraine and she feels like taking marijuana and running out of the room. That is a lot of anxiety. So when you are anxious, your stomach gets queasy, you feel like going to the toilet, you develop a slight migraine, and feel like taking marijuana and running out of here.
I never knew this was anxiety, though I have always felt anxious as far as I can remember.
So now the patient and the therapist have noticed the symptoms of anxiety in the room. Now you're going to find out what's causing the anxiety in the room with the therapist because this will let us know what is it about interactions which causes this patient's anxiety. So shall we look at what brings up anxiety here in this room with me, which is so crippling to you?
Sure.
I wonder if there are some thoughts or feelings that come up in this interaction that make you so anxious.
Oh no, I came with an open mind because you came highly recommended. I have no feelings towards you,
A thought, perhaps, which could be making you anxious.
just that you might think I'm crazy.
So, as the therapist begins to inquire as to what could be making the patient anxious, if there are any thoughts or emotions which the patient is experiencing in the room, the patient says that she has a thought that she may be judged by the therapist, that the therapist may think that she is crazy. Now, this is a sign of projection, and this is not unique. This is so common. All of us project all the time. You see, when you're going to give a lecture on the stage, we are always worried about what people might think about us. You perhaps go to meet, you know, mm, a prospective in-laws. We are very scared about what they will think about us. So you see, we are always projecting. And we're noticing that this patient as well is extremely anxious. That's not a problem if, like we talked about in the previous video, if the patient has regulated anxiety, the patient is not really suffering as much from anxiety. But in this patient, we notice that because of this projection, the patient's anxiety is really high. And she really has severe symptoms which follow this projection. So, in order to help her with this anxiety, we'll have to deal with the projection. Let's see what we can do about it. So, when this thought popped up in your mind, it sort of automatically traveled to my mind as though I too would be having this thought about you. And in turn, it made you anxious and you experienced the symptoms like the migraine, the nausea, and the urge to go to the toilet.
Gosh, I've always felt I'm being judged around people, though I know that a lot of people I know don't ever do that.
So, here the therapist makes the patient aware that this thought popped up in her mind and it kind of sort of automatically looked like it traveled to the therapist's mind. And then It felt to the patient as though the therapist has this thought about her, and in turn, it made the patient anxious, and this anxiety gave her all these symptoms. Now the patient says this is something that happens to her all the time when she's around people, and no wonder she feels anxious when she's meeting people. This gives her insight into her problem. I'm glad we are noticing this automatic pattern that gets you anxious. The question is, would you like to actively watch out for any thoughts or feelings that may emerge in our interaction which may make you anxious so that together we can work on this anxiety?
Yes, please.
Something about working with me to resolve your problem is making you anxious.
Yes. I've taken counseling earlier, but I think, like my previous therapist, you will get fed up of me and stop my sessions and say I must try more.
Now, here, the therapist explains the process and then she invites the patient to whether she would like to pay close attention to what thoughts are coming up and whether they can together work on this anxiety. Now, the patient says yes, but she gets extremely tense. Now, the therapist says, what is it that's making you anxious? And the patient now gives some more information. She begins to say that she had some counseling sessions earlier, but those were stopped by the previous therapist because the therapist felt that the patient wasn't making much progress. So now her experience from the previous therapy is coming in the way of her depending on a new therapist. Now, for all of us who have patients who've been for previous therapies, this is something that we need to address with every patient so that we can clear it and it goes out of the way. Because unless we clear it, the patient is likely to view the new therapist with the. So, how to work on this carrying over of previous experiences as well as projections? It's going to come up in our future videos. I hope you liked this video. And if you like to do subscribe to it, we keep you updated with all that we're posting. And do take care of yourself and be safe. Goodbye.